All right, so research in lifespan developmental, this part's pretty short. Hopefully you kind of already have a general idea of some of these. Lab research, you bring people into the lab, you control independent variables, you measure dependent variables. These are, stronger, like experimental way of doing things. That is going to be the laboratory. That's one way of collecting data. Naturalistic would be observing behavior in real world settings, but you don't actually try to control anything. You just kind of watch what's going on. For example, I was talking on an earlier slide, the idea of, are boys or girls more physically aggressive on the playground? If you went to the playground and you watched the kids, that would be a naturalistic observation. You're not trying to control behavior. You're just trying to observe it. You could, for methods of collecting data, you could do surveys. The problem with surveys is that people are liars. And so sometimes people are just going to give you what they think are socially acceptable answers instead of how they truly feel or how they truly behave. With physiological measurements, like images of the brain, for example, you can't lie on those. So that's one real positive to using physiological measurements, that you can't lie on them like you can with surveys. Like cortisol, too. This is linked to the body's stress level. That is a physiological measurement. It's not something that you can lie on. You can't, lie your way out of it. Side note, there are people in the psych department here at LSU that do cortisol research, if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, on research design, the first one is descriptive, and so you would basically just observe things, you would get a number, and you would report that number. So if you went to the playground again and you saw 20 acts of aggression, you would just come back and report that. That's descriptive. There were 20 acts of aggression. It's just basically one variable that you're reporting on. Correlation, first of all, correlation is not causation. You've probably heard that before, meaning that as one variable goes up, it doesn't mean if another variable goes up with it. It doesn't necessarily mean that that variable is driving this other variable to go up. It just means there's a relationship between those two variables. Example related to this that I've been talking about. So let's say if you looked at aggression and age. And so as age go up, more aggressive acts on the playground go up. That doesn't necessarily mean that age is causing aggression. It just means that there's a relationship there. So that's correlational, that's descriptive. The last one is experimental. And what you're trying to do here is get to causation. What is the cause of these behaviors? So like with Bandura and the aggression, with the Bobo the doll, it's a carefully regulated procedure in which one or more factors believed to influence behavior are being studied or manipulated, and all the other factors are being held constant. So in that Bobo the doll, they had some of the adults beat on the doll, they had some of the adults hug the doll. That's the independent variable, and then the dependent variable was that they measured, how the kids interacted with the doll. But that was in the lab, that was an experimental. You have the manipulated independent variable. Just kind of as a side note, something else you need for a true experiment is random assignment. So when they brought those kids into the lab, some of them they would assign to watch an adult beat on the doll, and then some they would assign to watch hug the doll. Randomly assign them. Okay. Last slide is on ethical guidelines in research. Hopefully you know some of these too. I think for intro psych you had to do like 6 SONA credits, so you probably are a little bit aware of these things. First one is informed consent, that you are experimenting on people, that you are not experimenting on people without their consent. You have to have them sign a consent form. You have to tell them essentially what the experiment they're being involved in. You have to keep their data confidential. After the experiment is over, you have to do what's called a debrief, where you explain what the study was that they participated in, and then also deception. So you can have deception in your experiments, but if you do deceive your participants in your study, afterwards you have to do a debrief where you explain why there was deception and why it was necessary to have that deception in it for that experiment. All right. So that's chapter 1. Again, kind of a mishmash of different things, but some of the things that we will talk about throughout the entire course. Chapter 2, it's somewhat of another overview where we will discuss things like for evolutionary psych, discuss things like epigenetics. So thank you for listening to chapter 1.